Your Heart show, where we talk with powerful women who are shaking up the globe with spreading love, wholeness, and wellness. This show was created to be a living anthology of unsung female heroes that are currently writing history as we speak. In our local backyard, if you will. The reason why this show was brought together was there are so many things that we will hear about people from a different time period. But I personally would love to hear from people that are currently living, that have went through the hero's journey of finding themselves and then going with their divine path and then being the overcomer that they were always in the very beginning. That is the reason for this show. And today, I am so thankful and grateful to get the opportunity to interview our very own on the Wisdom app, Graciela Moore, with Song of Myself Coaching. She is all about getting into your soul alignment, confidence, and hope. Graciela, tell us who you are and what do you do?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Charente. I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. So, who am I? And what do I do? That's such a loaded question. Okay, so I am where do I start though, right? So I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. Let's start there. So I am Puerto Rican, fully bilingual, and everything I do it in two languages. So let's start there. I also coach people in Spanish, which is really interesting. But hope is everything to me. So when I became a coach, I focused on hope kind of as a niche before even niching down to a specific demographic. Hope is all over my story. So to answer your question, I am someone who grew up always dreaming because my environment and my surroundings and my relationships were extremely disconnected, toxic, not very nurturing. And so I was always like there, right? So I'm talking about myself as a child. I was always there, but always like daydreaming about where I wanted to be when I grew up, which essentially was in the States, um, far away, right? Far away from here, anywhere but here. That was what I used to say when I was little, right? To myself. And so I learned the language. In Puerto Rico, we all speak Spanish. There is access to the English language. So I pretty much just wanted to speak a language that nobody in my life, in my family could understand or that they spoke it. They do speak English, but it's they wouldn't consider themselves or even describe themselves as like, fully bilingual, right? So when I was little, I had access to English and I'm like, I so don't feel like I belong here that I kind of attached that sentiment to, oh, I'm going to learn a language that none of them speak. I also love American Sign Language because I felt it was so fascinating to see deaf people communicating with their hands and nobody knew what they were saying. So I've always been interested in kind of like that aspect of, this is between two people and other people don't know what they're talking about. And it's because of my disconnection with my environment when I was growing up in a toxic home, right? And so I am a person who spends a lot of time focusing on future plans. As an adult, I've narrowed it down to a more immediate future, next month or maybe 3 months in advance. I don't really daydream that much because I've gotten to the point where I am in a safe environment, where I am in a nurturing home. And so I treasure the present moment, which is also something I coach, my clients about mindfulness and being present, right? So I'm also a millennial. And with the millennial aspect of my personality comes a sense of growing up with all of this immediacy. And growing up with immediacy at the touch of our hands, with all these devices, comes a sense of impatience. And I feel like generationally speaking, we don't really sit to ponder goals because we're already discouraged because we don't want to put in the work because we just want it to be done like right away, right? I'm sure you can relate to the feeling of, I want to create this, but look at all the steps I have to go through. Oh my goodness, how am I going to get it done? I wish it could just be. And generationally speaking, there's a gap there where people just give up on their dreams because they don't want to put in the work because they realize that it's not immediate. So I grew up being very impatient as well. I wanted everything done right away. I want it now, so on and so forth. And so I bring that to my coaching as well with the hope aspect of no, no, no. Everything is a process, little steps, create big changes, right? So um, I'm also a mother. I'm a stepmom, but they're all adults. My stepkids are between 23 and 16. So they pretty much just all do their thing and we just meet, around the table to eat from time to time. They all have jobs and they're in school and married and all that. But I'm a toddler mom and I definitely attach this role to my personality as part of who I am because a lot of my journey for the past 3 years since I had my son has really defined what my efforts are all about. A lot of the things that I'm trying to figure out for myself is because I want to be able to provide that clarity to him. There is no doubt in my mind that he guides me, inadvertently because he doesn't know what he's doing. Obviously, he's only 3, but he guides me with his curiosity. He's kind of like that compass that allows me to be like, oh no, this is how I want to do things. And it's all for him. So I think that answers your question. And what do I do? Okay, so this is the second part of the question. I do a lot. I am a full-time life coach and a full-time content creator and a full-time business owner. So aside from running my life coach business, my husband and I also have other businesses. We own a vinyl record store that we're very excited about because we love vinyl. And we also have a junk business where people may, have junk in their house because they moved or because they are moving. And so we remove that and dispose of it. So I do.
You do a lot, and I appreciate you, and I thank you, and I have questions now.
Yes, I figured you would.
You gave me a lot to give me
Yeah.
questions. Mm-hmm. So you said that you grew up in Puerto Rico. For me, being born in Southern California, I honestly don't know what that would be like. Can you describe to me your childhood and of our scenery and who your mom and dad were?
Yes. So Puerto Rico is beautiful. Think lush Caribbean island because that's what it is. I love how it's like strategically placed on the map so perfectly well that on the north you have the Atlantic waters, and in the south you have the Caribbean Sea, which is surprising. It's a tiny island. It's only 100 kilometers by 35 kilometers. So, how perfectly freaking placed is it on the map? I love it. And so there's also a rainforest in it, which is very famous, and it ranks in like the top beaches of the world. So it is beautiful when it comes to the scenery. Now, my life, Puerto Rico could be considered a third world country. It is an island, much like, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Cuba. But because of its political affiliation to the United States, we do have the US dollar and English part of the curriculum. So everybody has access to English classes from like pre K to senior year. If you wanted to learn English, you do have access to it, right? Now, I did grow up. I don't take my upbringing for granted despite toxicity because I definitely know I grew up very privileged. We went to private schools, for example, right, as opposed to public schools, which in Puerto Rico, the public schools do not compare to the public schools here in the States. Like here, the schooling is amazing, and I'm very grateful and surprised for what the public system provides. But in Puerto Rico, that's not the case. So if you want your children to have, a great education, then you have to invest in a private school, right? So we grew up in private school, and my upbringing was also very particular because my father was a prominent musician. So we also went to music school. We kind of didn't have a choice about that. It's like, oh yeah, I want to be a ballerina. No, here's a guitar. You're going to music school because your dad is a musician. Oh, okay, great. I guess I'm playing the guitar now. So we would go to school all day and then go to a different music school and then get home at like 7 p.m. So that was my entire life from 8 years to 18 years old, pretty much my entire, school career. And with a dad that was a musician came a lot of traveling all over the island to festivals and shows, radio interviews, where my dad would be performing, just very, very active in the culture scene, right? I guess we can call it that because all of these festivals, they essentially, they're the landmark for the culture of a place, right? So we grew up going from one festival to the next. All over the summer, we would be like, next weekend, we're going to this place. Okay, great. What time do we need to get up? And then the next weekend. So my life was very, very involved in what my father was doing professionally or artistically, if you will. And then the other side of that was having a mom that was a breadwinner. She literally made like three times what my dad made in his job. And she started her professional career as a secretary and literally made it all the way up in the same company until she was the manager of like four branches of her store. So I grew up with that example as well of like entrepreneurial go getter. I've had a job since I was 13. Every single summer of my life, I worked, right? And so that was no doubt pretty influenced by how both of them were go getters in their own endeavors, right? And then, Puerto Rico is so small that if I got out of school and I played hooky and didn't go to my music school, I could go to the beach to do my homework. That was like an easy 20-minute drive. Or I'm a bit of a geek, so I also would go to the Museum of Art to do my homework, just to hang out with the pieces of art because I'm an empath like that, and so that was fun for me. And then I majored in literature right there in the island. And you're gonna laugh at this because I really wanted to go away to college, right? Like that was my dream. If you grow up in a toxic home, you obviously want to go away when you graduate. It's like, yes, I'm an adult, I'm free now. And I went away to college just 2 hours away because the island is so small that me going away meant I was just 2 hours away.
You
So,
tried your
LOL.
best.
I know, I tried my very best. And I would still go home every single weekend to do my laundry and just things like that. I'm going to go home this weekend because I need groceries and I know my mom's going to deliver. So it was great. And then I graduated college and went to the north to San Juan, which is the capital. And that's where I pursued a master's that I sadly couldn't finish because of a car accident. But in San Juan, I had the most funnest job I've ever had. And I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I used to be a card games dealer in a casino. So I used to deal blackjack, roulette, baccarat, poker, all these games. And I would spend all day speaking with tourists and speaking English. And it was just so much fun.
I love that, and I almost completely knew about it because I listened to your Dio interview when you had it earlier this year. And I was literally in Walgreens grabbing something, and I was like, "Oh, she really did that too." Tell me more, Graciela. As you're talking to Dio.
Yes, I know. It was so much fun. I didn't even know I was good at math, honestly. Like, I just needed a full-time job while I was doing my master's. And I signed up for an ad pretty much with the confidence of knowing that, yes, I am fully bilingual. I can do this, right? And previous to that job experience, I had also been a waitress in hotel restaurants. I had been a bartender. Like I said, I've had many jobs since I was 13. And so the hospitality aspect of the job plus the language aspect of it were kind of like my two, the tools in my belt that I had like 100% confidence on. And then the ad said, no previous knowledge needed. We're going to coach you and teach you everything. So I was like, I'm applying. I'm totally there. And much to my surprise, I had to take a math exam or a quiz or whatever, a math testing type of form, because there's a lot of math involved in, dealing with these card games and having the money on the table. And so I passed, which is really funny because I took pre-cal 1 like 3 times in college. I literally flunked it every single time. So for me to pass that exam felt like very divine, like a divine gift, letting me know that I was on my way to something there. And it was so.
This show is brought to you by JCLV21. JCLV21 is a coaching company that was created to help women business owners, podcasters, and entrepreneurs build the foundation for their business or their podcast. With automation, structure, marketing, hiring, and mentorship, JCLV21 provides you with what you need to be successful for your business, your podcast, and your life. They believe that everyone deserves to shine in their divine. Head over to jclv21.com to book a call or text the word book to 702-334-8470 to schedule a free consultation today. Now let's head back to the interview. I absolutely love it. You said a lot again, and I have more questions. Hi. Questions over here. So my question to you is that when you were first starting, when it came to your schooling, if I'm not mistaken, I've previously heard that you went to vet school before you decided on your major. And then after getting your bachelor's, you went into getting your master's. Can you tell me more just about your education?
Of course, yeah. So I wanted to be a vet when I was very small. Honestly, I got over that as soon as I realized how messy it all was because I don't tend to like messes, like bloody stuff and whatnot. So I got over being a vet pretty early on and just realized I just like having pets. So that was like very early on. I'm talking child, with a vet Barbie. When I had my college applications in hand, as a senior, and absolutely no parental guidance as to, what do you want to do with your life? Let's sit down and do this together, like nothing. I realized, what do I love? What resonates with me that I could really do forever? And reading and the English language were the obvious answers. So I majored in English. So I'm a product of the English department of our university in Puerto Rico. And I took, you could take 2 tracks. So you could take the linguistic side of it, which most people that graduated from that went into teaching or writing about language development and cultural aspects of language. And that just didn't interest me, like the humanities aspect of language, right? Or the historical aspect of it. I was more into the fictional or the literary side of it. So I majored in English literature with a minor in film because the film department literally was born as I was, studying my degree. So I did an extra year in college to stick around to finish my certificate in film. And the thing about doing my master's is that, in Puerto Rico, the university where I graduated from is also the top 3 engineering schools in all of the United States. So Puerto Rico's education is very, very good. And as a result, there's very little to do but to study and get professional education. So, literally on my graduation day, my dad looked at me and said, "So, what are you going to do your master's on?" And I really wasn't really interested in doing a master's to begin with. I wanted to just enjoy my time, take my time, figure it out. Like I literally just finished 5 years of college. Let me take a breather. But I felt obviously, very pressured. And the thing about feeling pressure from parents or figures of authority is if they're supporting you financially, which was the case for me at that time. Even though I worked every summer, they still, would pay for my car or for my housing. They would fill up my gas every now and then. And so, there's a support there, right? And there's, of course, a sense of respect and a sense of duty when someone is supporting you in that capacity. So when he said that, I was like, I don't know. I guess I'll look into it and figure out what my master's is going to be. And so I went into a master's in screenwriting because that just felt like the most common sense to me as a film major and as someone who loves movies and films and TV in general. I went into screenwriting, and that's when I was doing like the casino work while I was doing my master's. But like I said earlier, I went through a car accident that was a major injury like on my body, and I pretty much lost everything. So my brand new car was a total loss. I was disabled from my job because I couldn't properly perform the function of like looking down at the table, and my neck was so injured I couldn't do it. So I lost my job, and of course I lost my apartment because I couldn't pay for it, and I ended up moving back to my parents and never finishing my master's degree. But it honestly didn't even feel like a failure to me, like, oh my gosh, who are you, like you didn't finish your master's, because it never was like soul aligned, right? To take it back to my work, it wasn't soul aligned for me to pursue a master's to begin with. I was just doing it for someone else. So when my accident happened and I couldn't finish my master's, I was like, I'm just going to do something else and I'm over it. And so I don't have a master's degree. And at this point, I've thought about going back to school to finish a master's in psychology, but that's actually my research about that is actually what drove me to become a life coach, because life coaching is based on positive psychology. So instead of spending a ton of money getting a master's degree, right, I decided to spend a much smaller amount on getting a certification and then becoming a life coach. And this brings us back to last year when I became a life coach at 36 years old. Yay!
Success. I love it.
That's right.
So I have questions upon questions upon questions. I got list, girl. So my question to you was, when your father said what he said, did you feel hurt by it? Did you feel unseen by it?
No, not really. I felt like, well, I guess unseen. I didn't really think in those terms back then, in all honesty. Hang on, I have to open it. I felt like it was more about him than me. And I guess you can describe that as feeling unseen, but like I said, I didn't really think in those terms. I just felt like he was also pursuing a master's degree very late in his life. My mother also finished her degree when I was in high school. So they were doing these things for themselves pretty late in life. And so I just understood where that kind of pressure was coming from. They wanted me to do it right away because that's probably the way that they would have done it if they had had, the chance. And so I just didn't make anything of it other than, oh my gosh, can we just take a moment, right? And in all honesty, that type of attitude, or I don't even know what to call it, that type of mindset, let's call it a mindset, was kind of common in my family where, we would be on vacation, for example, and I've said this before, so you might have heard me say it. We would be on vacation, and my older sister would already be talking and planning next year's vacation. And I understand, some people are big planners like that. I get it. Some people like to save money and, they book their next year's cruise today so that they can save the money for that. And that's fine if that's you. But I always felt like, oh my gosh, we haven't even finished this vacation. Can we just take a moment and appreciate the moment? And then when we go back home to real life, we can talk about next year's vacation. You see where I'm going? Like, I felt a little icky at the fact that he literally did it right there with my cap and gown, like after did, and we were, and so I felt a little bit ticked by that, but I didn't think it or took it personal because I kind of instinctually knew that it wasn't about me for them to ask me that kind of.
Thank you for answering that. And the reason I asked is because I want to paint a picture. Because some people, they're told that and they are feeling that, but they don't know what really happened or why they felt weird or they wanted to buck against it. And so I wanted to better understand where your mind was at, what you were thinking a little bit, because having that's pretty much saying, hey, you didn't do enough. You didn't do enough. And that's like it's throwing it in your face,
Oh
especially
yeah.
when you've said that you've worked multiple jobs, you did all the music things, you were in cover
Mm-hmm.
bands, you did daycares, you took care of your own stuff for years,
Oh
and
yeah.
then you were met with that.
Well, that's funny that you bring that up because the not doing enough is part of that toxicity I grew up with. So, like, nothing I did was enough. And still to this day, like, I'm not a good enough of a mom or a good enough of a wife, or I don't decorate my home enough, or like, I don't even know. It's ridiculous, right? And so growing up, that sense of not being enough was pretty much my everyday. And I didn't realize it until much later in life when I'm figuring out, like, dang it, like I keep getting from bad relationship to worse relationship to bad relationship, and I'm so over it, like I really need some help figuring all this out. And then I start realizing, like, oh holy moly, like I thought my upbringing was normal, but lo and behold, that was kind of toxic, or that was kind of mean, or that was kind of unnecessary. But I didn't realize those things until I was pretty much like 30 years old. And so if we are looking back at my life when I was 25 or 22, all of that was just my day to day, which is really sad. I get it, but it's just what it is. So I'm glad that you picked that up.
Thank you for being open and thank you for being honest. And I will say for me, there have been times in my life that I have felt that, even though my mom has always been a supporting component of my life as well as my father, the best way that he could. So when you say what you said, I was like, oh, I felt that. Oh, I felt that. And then I would have just said, oh, it's fine. I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll be quiet and I'll just live my life. And because we're live, I just want to acknowledge Frankie J and all the claps and the love that he's sharing right now on the Wisdom app.
Yes,
So
thank you. I
thank
didn't know if
you,
we could do
Frankie.
that. Frankie, we see you.
I'm calling it out because I acknowledge it and I want to make sure people know that I do see them when we're on live. And I do
Yes.
acknowledge you. When I'm off live, then that's totally different because I don't know you really clapping. When
Yeah.
we're live, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to voice that out. So now that's progressed just a little bit. We talked about your education. We talked about your childhood. I just want to know how you really like formed your faith. And there's this thing called the Wesleyan Quadrilateral. And what the Wesleyan Quadrilateral is all about is letting you know, looking at the reason, your experience, the tradition, and scripture, and actually looking at your faith path. So my question to you is that when you were forming your faith, because I saw a post that you did on your Instagram where you said you lost your faith when you were in your teens. How did you reform it? Was it through reason, experience, tradition, scripture, or a mixture of everything?
So that's a great question. And I had never heard about the thing you just mentioned. You know what that is.
Wesleyan quadrilateral.
Yes, thank you. So, um, so let's go back to my childhood. Like I said, growing up in a toxic home, part of that toxicity was me being the empath child who had the kind of sibling that was always like, who are you and where did you come from? You know, like the milkman dropped you off at the front door one day, like you don't belong here. And so with that came a very innate quest for figuring out who I was. And my spiritual life, my spiritual awakening, if you want to call it that, it's always been there. I don't remember like, you know, one day suddenly waking up and feeling spiritually aligned, because when I was little, that's pretty much all I had. And you know, now that you've seen me with the moon and my show and whatever, well, picture a 6 or 5 year old, which is tiny, right? Like, look at my child. He's only 3. So imagine just 2 years from now. Picture a 6 year old sitting in the floor, looking outside the window at the moon, pondering, like, man, I don't belong here. So where do I belong? And having all these internal conversations and knowing very succinctly that I was a child of God, right? And always believing in a higher power. So my faith in just, spirit in general, I've always been a heavy prayer, if you want to call it that, like prayer, you know what I mean? And that's probably the Taurus in me, right? Think about in India, the national symbol for prayer is the cow, right? So I'm a Taurus and I am very rooted in my zodiac sign, if you want to, just speak in those terms. And so even as a young child, people would request me to be the one to say the prayer for something because they were like, oh, your prayers are so nice. And I would spend a lot of time just praying, if you want to call it that, talking to spirit, communicating with something that would be more receptive than the people in my experience, because they were not receptive to what I had to say, right? They wouldn't even give me the time of day. Very active. So I grew up Catholic and I was very active, youth programs and all these things. And then you mentioned a post where I mentioned that I lost my faith in my teenage years. Well, this has to do with me graduating high school. And much Christian religions have what they call the sacrament, right? You get the bread, which is the body of Christ, and the water or the wine, which is the blood of Christ. So if you're listening from pretty much any denomination, you know what I'm talking about.
Communion.
And so, right, communion, yes. So that's what they call it in the Catholic Church, exactly. And so what happened with me was we were getting ready to, before you do your actual graduation, you do like a rehearsal. And I grew up in private schools, and in Puerto Rico, 99% of private schools are Catholic. So it was a Catholic school. The principal was a nun, all these things. And so the graduation ceremony is going to be performed in a chapel or in the church building, and it's going to be recorded so that everybody can take home a video. Okay, great. And in this rehearsal, we are informed that you have no choice. You have to go to confession because you have to stand up to take your communion, because this will be recorded and everyone has to do it. And that didn't sit well with me because I want to be able, I have agency. We all have agency. And I want to be able to get up and go to confession because I am aware of what I've done and I want repentance, or I want to seek out from my own free will the atonement that I need or that I want for my soul. I don't need to be told in these terms, especially if you're telling me I have to do something to keep appearances. Ooh, that's just never sat right with me, like just living off of appearances, right? And so I felt very disconnected and very turned off by that. And I pretty much never went back after that. I would just go to church if my parents, like my dad would play in the church sometimes at Christmas, and I would go and I would sit with them, but I never went back to the Catholic Church. So pretty much from 18 years old until I was like 25 or 26, which is when I moved to Texas and, began singing at a Methodist church. From that entire lapse in years, I just never went to church, and I was kind of quote unquote lost spiritually because, again, I felt like I didn't have a place to belong to. right? Because the one church I belonged to growing up, it wasn't there. So I call that, like, my apostasy years. I was just lost in the desert, spiritually speaking.
Walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I fear
That's
not,
right.
for God is with
Exactly.
me. So
Right.
I completely understand you. And I will say, wow. First, having from your child home, you're not enough, we don't want you. And then going to the next place where you can find your esteem is at a church and in your community. And also being met with, if you don't do this, like, you ain't it anymore. Like, this is just not what we do here. You have to do this, and I have to control you.
Right.
And I'm trying to figure out. And you had a car accident, and you were learning other languages, and Graciela, how in the world did you get to you getting into that safe relationship with your now husband, and then going into life coaching and having your niche being HSP and helping people get from sensitivity to their power? How did all that transpire?
So, let me see. Okay, so during my master's, right, that's when I get that car accident. And in all honesty, my car accident is my testimony of, when the divine God, Christ, whatever I want to call it, right? When Christ or God has a plan for you, which I do believe in, the plan of happiness. That's what we call it in our church, or the plan of salvation. Like, I believe in these things and I love them so much for the context of them. It's just so beautiful. So I believe that when the divine has a path for you and you're just so not in tune, that you're further from it than you could ever get, things really get shaken up in your life. And when my car accident happened, my life was so upside down that I almost didn't even complain. I was like, yep, I get it. Yep, this is it. This is rock bottom right here. Just take it all away from me and build me up anew, because I am right there with you. I see you. I get it. I understand. And so, going back to my parents at 25 with a neck injury, when before I was making more money than my dad and I was pretty much up on the clouds. I had like my bachelorette pad and I had my job, which was super fun. And we would go from the job to like the night scene and meet up with our clients there, all the tourists partying all night long. And then I would go home and do my homework. And I'm, a mid-20 professional making all this money. I had a brand new car. So, I was living the life. And then all of a sudden it was all taken away, literally, along with my pride, right? And so I was back home with my parents, and it was the saddest thing ever because that was the furthest thing I wanted. And so, again, the miracles of the divine, this job or this opportunity lands on my lap, which is a job search. The Dallas Independent School District, apparently, because I didn't know that until then, apparently they go to Puerto Rico every year to kind of draft, the way that you would do on a college, on a football team, right? They draft bilingual teachers to bring to Texas to then, have them be teachers in the Dallas Independent School District. And again, it was another opportunity for me to measure my confidence because I wasn't a teacher. I didn't go to school to become a teacher. I didn't have an education degree at all. I did do one on one tutoring along with the many things I always did for about 11 years at that point. I've always been kind of like an English tutor, a writing tutor. If anybody needs help, I'm there to help. And so I had that on my bag. And again, it was another one of those opportunities of like, we need someone who is 100% bilingual. And I was like, well, that's me. Absolutely. If I've done anything for myself, it's that. So at least I have that, right? And so I literally drove to San Juan with my neck brace on, and I sat there in the waiting room with my neck brace on and then took it off for the interview. So it was fresh out of my car accident, and I landed the job. And so this was finally when a lifelong dream of moving to the United States finally came true. And I didn't necessarily want to be a teacher at all. That was never in my plans. So I kind of like spiritually or intuitively already know that this was like a stepping stone. Like, you know, this is a way for you to get out of the island where you clearly don't belong and just take you to where you actually want to be. And then, you know, you can figure out your next steps. It was so clear to me. So I went to Texas all by myself. You know, I did everything. This professional picked me up in a black car, like in the movies. I had so much fun just doing that. Um, I slept on the floor for like a week because I didn't have a bed. And then I was like, okay, fine. I guess I need a bed because my body hurts. So let's just spend money on that. I didn't have a car for a few weeks. I drove my bicycle everywhere until I realized Texas is way too hot for that. And then I gave up and I'm like, okay, fine. I guess I need a car. And so I took that internship to become a teacher, which was a quick, 8 weeks of here's everything you need to know. And then all of a sudden it's here's a classroom, go be a teacher. And I was like, holy moly, I don't know what I'm doing. And everything was great until I found myself in the classroom with 25 kids and I didn't know what I was doing. And I had all this responsibility. So, needless to say, I did not enjoy it. And at that point in my life, I had no idea about what standing in my power was like. At that point in my life, I was a highly sensitive person who had no clue what my sensitivities were. And so I had always kind of not liked very much like big crowds and big events. You know, I didn't want a quinceañera. I didn't want a big wedding. And so me in a classroom with 25 kids and not knowing their energetic input and what that means for me and my body, I was always moody and I was not a fun teacher. And so I did not enjoy it. Plus, you add to that the fact that I really didn't know what I was doing. So every single night, I would spend like endless hours researching the next day's lesson so that I could survive the next day. And it was exhausting. So I was in a relationship at the time. That was the last relationship before I met my husband. And I remember, having a conversation with him about how I'm exhausted mentally, physically, emotionally, and I really don't think this is for me. So before I got that job in Texas, I was already pondering after my car accident, maybe getting a real estate license in Puerto Rico. But then I got that job in Texas and I moved to Texas, right? So when I'm having this conversation with my boyfriend at the time, he says, well, what if you pursue the real estate license you were going to pursue before? Just quit. If this is not for you, then just quit. And I've done so much professionally that I've never really believed that quitting is for losers or that quitting is bad. Like if something doesn't work, you stop doing it. There's no shame in that. You just move on to the next thing, right? So I literally called them during spring break and said, I'm not coming back. Thank you so much. Everything in my classroom, you can donate it. You can keep it. I am happy to give it all away as long as I don't have to come back there. And so I didn't. And, I took my savings and we looked at the real estate licenses in Texas and looked at all the logistics and, decided together to move to Florida. Don't ask why. We just all of a sudden said, Florida is closer to Puerto Rico, cheaper flights. I could see my family more often. So let's just move to Florida. I became a realtor here in Florida, and that's where I met my husband.
Yay!
So awesome. Yay. And so when I met Michael, I was engaged to this person. And Michael was in a marriage of almost 19 years with a whole family. So when him and I met, it was nothing like us even the farthest thing from even liking each other. He was just a realtor in the office, and I was just over here doing my thing, never even considered what our future would be like. But you fast forward a year after that, and we find each other with both our relationships severed. And we started dating, and we've been inseparable ever since. Yay! There you go.
Yay. And they have a child. And they have a child.
That's right. And he's the
Named
prince,
Elijah.
the youngest of six.
I absolutely love it. I love your story. And I have a question for you. So, you said that you wanted to move, you guys decided to move to Florida because, like, why not? It's closer to your family. So, since all of the things that happened in your childhood, you're still building a relationship with your family, or are you keeping them at a distance? How does that look like now? Are they more incorporated with Elijah and the stepchildren, or no?
Um, so not really, because none of my family lives here. They're all in Puerto Rico. And, with my own, and I didn't finish the question about coaching, so I guess I can tie it all now. But with my own, once I found myself in a safe relationship, which none of my previous relationships were, the previous relationship I had, which was the one I was just talking about that we moved to Florida, that was very neglecting. I went through surgery, and I remember my doctor telling me, if you want to have a child, you really need to look into this right away because your endometriosis is really severe. And I looked at my neglecting relationship, and I was like, well, that's not going to happen in this relationship because that hasn't happened in a while. And so it was when I found myself with Michael 8 years ago, that's really when I started healing. And, let me get a therapist and let me make sense of my life. That's when I started researching, who am I and why am I the way that I am? Because I am different. I recognize that, right? And so that's when I learned about highly sensitive people and empath and energy work and all these things. And so many things in my life started making sense, like the bullying or the feeling of displacement or the feelings of just not belonging. It all started making sense when I started investigating, like, why am I the way that I am, and what's my trauma, and what do I need to heal, right? So what happened was kind of like another awakening, right? And that, to me, that awakening was when I had Elijah 3 years ago. It all became so clear. I swear, I had heard other people use their kids as an excuse before, and I had never really understood it until I had a newborn baby in my hands, and I was like, oh, I'm never putting up with these things ever again. Like, I would be able to provide him with the safest home, inclusive, accepting, honoring as best as we can. And my husband looked at me and said, I agree. Okay, great. Well, how are we going to do this? And, sadly, one of the ways that I needed to really ensure that we could create that for my child was creating boundaries. And so my family doesn't live here. So at least I have that physical detachment, right? So it's not like they can just pop in at any time. Hi, I'm here visiting. Like, no, that doesn't happen. And as a highly sensitive person, my friends know that coming unannounced is not cool because you're just going to give me anxiety and I don't appreciate it, right? So please send me notice before you visit Charente. So with that just came kind of like that distance. So if I don't, what's the word? The toxicity is still there because sadly they don't do the work, right? They're still in that mindset. They're not in that growth mindset of, oh my gosh, yes, these things happened. Like, I'll speak freely about my dad and his alcohol abuse, and they all deny all of this. Or if they don't deny it, they don't even speak about it like it was a problem, but it was a problem, right? And so I speak so freely about these things that I am obviously othered or ostracized. The issue, or non issue actually, the thing is that because I was always ostracized to begin with, at this point, standing in my power, I don't even care. I'm going to talk about it and bring awareness to it, right? And that's what standing in my power is. It's like these things or these childhood wounds don't ever get in my way anymore. Now I use them as fuel for what I'm trying to create and the people that I'm trying to help. And if standing in your power means that sadly you need to create distance and put boundaries up from the people in your family, then you make your own family and that's the end of it, right? You belong to yourself and that's it. Because even a marriage could dissolve, right? Like, let's be honest, it happens all the time. Look at me, I am my husband's second wife, right? So it's that realization of no matter what, I belong to myself and no one is going to take that away from me anymore. And I do what I want and I validate myself, and if my husband is on board, great, and my child will be protected in the process. And so with real estate came a lot of coaching, because when you're a buyer's agent, meaning someone who represents someone that is buying a house, there's a lot of hand holding and a lot of psychological coaching involved, because uprooting your family to move to a new place is a life transition. And if there are children involved, there's a lot of hand holding that needs to happen. So I was in real estate for 7 years until the pandemic hit. And that's when I got furloughed, and with that furlough came a little money, right? Here's a little severance check for you to survive the pandemic. We don't need you anymore. Goodbye. And so that's when I started pondering, like, what else is next? I honestly, after all my years working, I could never envision just being at home with my child, not doing anything professionally, even if the option was there. So I pondered whether I was going to go back to school to pursue psychology and the certification. And it felt kind of like a leveling up from from the real estate coaching I was doing to leveling up to actually help people with their life, which was so in tune just with my soul to begin with. So I got certified, and it's been the biggest gift. I feel like the last year has been so transformative because in the process, I'm getting coached, right? I see my coach every week. And so seeing a coach is just so, it's a catalyst. You know, what took people 30 years, what took me 30 years, I want my clients to do it in 8 weeks. And it brings me so much joy to see people just find that power and stand in it and in themselves, because that's what life is all about. Like, you're a blessing in itself, and there's blessings everywhere. What is getting in the way of you seeing it? And if what's getting in the way is the people in your life because they're negative, then you need to focus on control, and you can control the boundaries that you set and your own mindset. So let's help you with that. Yay. And I love my work. I love it so much.
I love it, and I love you so very, very much. I have a question though. What is HSP and how do you know if you are it?
So highly sensitive people is a term coined by Elaine Page in 1991. And there's a test that you take to see where you fall in the spectrum. But here's the thing. First of all, there's a misconception about the word sensitivity. We tend to think that being sensitive has to do with your feelings. Oh, you just feel things and you're so dramatic and you're too sensitive. I can't tell you things. But sensitivity has to do with your senses. So hearing, sight, taste, touch, right? Energy. And so being a highly sensitive person is pretty much a neurodivergence in itself. Our brains just input a little bit more intensely than other people. So loud sounds will get in my way. Different lighting will interrupt my flow or even give me a headache. I don't appreciate being startled, right? It'll give me anxiety. If I watch something really gross and hardcore on TV because of my sight sense, I will inevitably have nightmares after that. So I don't really watch a lot of horror films or zombies or stuff like that, right? So it has to do with your senses. And, you know, I feel like everybody is in the spectrum, and depending on where you are on the spectrum, the level of your sensitivity. And then this gets attached to being empath, which is also something that we can all tap into. We can all develop empath. So empath is the ability, it's empathy, right? It's the ability to step in someone else's shoes, to really care for someone else, to acknowledge them and see them. Now, if you are empath and you are saying, I am empath because I can feel other people's emotions, that's your senses. So, in all honesty, that's a whole nother episode in itself because there's a lot there. But when I realized that I was highly sensitive empath, if you will, they tend to be together. And then I realized, how did I figure this out for myself in the last 30 years? I absolutely knew that I wanted to focus on, highly sensitive people who just don't even know. And the thing about not knowing is that with a lack of awareness comes a lack of control. And if your sensitivities are getting in the way of what you want to do, like, for example, you get headaches out of nowhere, you may be sensitive to foods as well, right? Because that's your taste sensitivity and just your body in general. So if your sensitivities are getting in the way, then you're not in your power. And that's what I help people do. It's like, let's look at all of your life, how you handle energy, how you handle the people in your experience, what's getting in the way of you just being yourself. That's what standing in your power is. Unapologetically, this is what I do and this is who I am and I belong. And that's pretty much the journey from, sensitivity.
Wow. My golly gosh. Amazing. You are absolutely amazing. And
Thank you
I
so
thank
much.
you for this time with me. And I just have a couple more questions for you. So if you want to drop down and come back up, and then we'll be done in less than like 10 minutes. So, my question is, what is one thing that you want the listeners to know is your central message of your story and your life?
I want the listeners to know that it's okay to be who they are and to make decisions according to who they want to be. Like, permission to do whatever you need to do so that you can do what you want to do. I know that's a mouthful, but I love saying that because for some reason it gets lost in translation. If you need permission to take control of your life, then here's your permission slip because it can make a difference. And there is hope for everyone. No one is hopeless. That's another thing I'm very big on. There's hope for everybody. And if you need someone that understands you, I want them to know that there's people out there. It's not just me. There's people like you, Charente, and others that can relate at a certain level and just help you with a little bit more of an objective lens than the people in your experience. So that would.
And I thank you. And before we even like go to like the final things, I just have to do this. It's that time.
Thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
so much fun.
Just thank you. Um, so my question is just to close this out is where can people find you is the first question. And the second one, if you can describe your offers, because if I'm not mistaken, you help have certain packages that you help people with, like soul alignment, confidence, and hope. If you can speak more about that, I'll greatly appreciate you because I want people to know how they can connect.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I am everywhere at SOM Coaching here on Wisdom and on Twitter, songofmyself.ig on Instagram, and somcoaching.com is my website. And so my offerings, like you said, so I do, one-on-one mentoring and coaching, which has no package at all. So the client becomes the one behind the wheel and it's pretty open to just interpretation and what you need on a weekly or monthly basis. So I do that, but I do have these packages that are pretty much already preset. And so that would be the Hope series, which has been featured on several organizations. And it's essentially a whole mindset thing about understanding hope from a psychological perspective, because as Christians, we tend to really just attach hope to faith and love and family, or hope in Christ. And we don't acknowledge that hope is a whole mindset in psychology that there's like studies and data for. And so when I learned that, I was very excited. So the Hope series is about going from hopeless to hopeful. And then the Confidence series is a package where you get to tap into what I call the 4 legs of a stool, which is, self-efficacy, self-love, self-compassion, and another one I can't think right now. But all 4 of them, in my experience, are what bring up that confidence once you tap into them, right? And then the journey into soul alignment, which is the one I recommend for people that are highly sensitive or empaths, is the one that goes into pretty much all of it. Like, what do we call it? Intense. It's like an intensive type of thing. It's 8 weeks. And, we tap into boundaries, we tap into energy, we learn about chakras, we learn about what your sensitivities are and how we can gain control of that, negative self-talk, just future visioning and life design. So we do all of it in that one package. And that would be it.
Thank you so very much. If you guys also want to catch her, you guys can go to cadlenly.com, SOM coaching /work with me. If you guys would like to go and work with her, besides going to all the other awesome things that she just shared and where she is and how to connect with her. Graciela, I just want to thank you so much for coming on to this show, giving us your story and taking us through how you went from the childhood that you experienced of not feeling like you were enough, not really feeling like you belong, to you creating the community around you, to you having the life that you dreamed that you'll want to have, and the relationships and the joy that you have cultivated over this time period. I applaud you, and I thank you for being on today's show.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Charente. I absolutely love you. And thank you for seeing me too. It felt so, so good to my soul to receive this invitation. So thank you so much.
You're absolutely welcome. And as I always say to close this out, outro. Thank you for listening to this episode of Speak From Your Heart Show. Remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast streaming platform. Be sure to give us a follow or DM us on Instagram at Speak From Your Heart Show, your takeaways and thoughts on this episode. That's all for this show. Until next time, see you.